Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, the sources you've brought us today, they present a view of the Old Testament that's, well, it's incredibly provocative.
It really is.
We're looking at materials that argue for reading the literal Hebrew, stripping away centuries, millennia even, of spiritual overlay. And they propose that the Bible in its original form isn't theology, it's a history, a record of contact with actual physical extraterrestrial visitors.
That's the essence of it, yeah. And it's a massive claim. These sources basically say that the entire Judeo-Christian tradition might be built on a deliberate distortion.
A distortion hiding a material history.
Exactly. So our mission here is to, quickly unpack the most striking claims from this literal reading, specifically how it completely redefines things like God, angels, creation, even the laws.
Right. So let's dive into that. The core argument. The powerful beings in these ancient texts weren't transcendent spirits. They were physical. Highly advanced, yes, but material beings from elsewhere, with very specific goals here on Earth.
Visitors, not deities in the way we usually think of them.
Okay, so where do we start? The identity of these gods.
We have to start with the names, really,
Yeah.
because the first big hurdle, the first alleged distortion, is the word typically translated as God.
Elohìm.
Elohim, yes. It's undeniably plural in Hebrew. The sources often render it as something like the lords from above or the powerful ones from the sky.
And translating that plural as a singular god. Well, that just changes everything from the get-go, doesn't it?
It collapses the whole monotheistic idea right there.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're not talking about one supreme being, but potentially a group, a council.
Which might reframe something like the first commandment. Maybe it wasn't worship only me, but more like, don't ally with the other powerful groups.
Precisely. It shifts it towards politics, maybe, or allegiance. And this connects directly to another term, Anakim.
Often translated vaguely like giants or something.
Right. But the sources insist on a more literal meaning, something like those who from heaven to earth came, put Elohim and Anakim together, and you start building this picture of physical extraterrestrial visitors.
And the sources make that explicit connection to the Sumerian text, right? Identifying them as the Anunnaki.
Yes, the Anunnaki. That gives us a potential anchor in Mesopotamian history and myth.
Okay, so if they were these advanced visitors, why Earth? Where did they come from? What was the purpose?
According to the interpretation linking biblical and Sumerian texts, they came from a planet called Nibiru, the crossing planet.
Nibiru, I remember that, with a really long orbit.
A very long elliptical orbit, something like 3,600 Earth years. And their reason for coming here wasn't spiritual enlightened for us. It was practical. Survival.
So survival, how so?
Their homeworld, Nibiru, was apparently facing a crisis, gradual atmospheric cooling. The solution proposed, according to these texts, was gold.
Gold, like our gold.
Yes. They needed vast quantities of gold to pulverize into a fine dust and essentially spray into Nibiru's atmosphere, to create a sort of thermal shield, a greenhouse effect, to trap heat.
Wow. Okay, so forget divine missions. This was planetary engineering driven by desperation. They were effectively refugees seeking a resource.
That's the picture painted. Advanced, yes. Long-lived, certainly. But driven by material needs. About 600 of these Anunnaki initially landed, setting up their first base in Mesopotamia, a place they called Eridu.
Eridu, which apparently means home away from home.
Exactly. And these events, this period when these powerful beings physically lived and worked here, that supposedly became the seed for all those myths of a golden age found across cultures. The time when gods walked the earth.
So the context is basically an extraterrestrial mining operation.
That's the framework presented, yes.
Which brings us straight to Genesis and creation. Because if they were here mining gold, that sounds like hard work, even for advanced beings.
It apparently was. The sources describe a major problem. The rank-and-file Anunnaki, sometimes called the Igigi, who were doing the actual digging. They rebelled.
A labor strike among the gods.
Essentially, yes. They protested the harsh conditions. So the leadership, specifically a commander named Enki, was tasked with finding a solution. And his solution was biological.
Biological, you mean?
Genetic engineering. The proposal was to take the primitive hominids already evolving on Earth and, well, upgrade them. Modify their genetics to create a substitute labor force capable of understanding instructions and doing the work.
So that's where humans come in, according to this theory. We were created or modified to be miners.
That's the interpretation. This new being was called Lu, meaning the blended one or the mixed one, and later Adamim, the earthly one. The time frame suggested is around 300,000 years ago.
Okay, the blended one. This links to the Genesis line about being made in the likeness of the Elohim, doesn't it? Using the word etzelim.
Precisely. And this is where the literal translation becomes crucial. Traditionally, Tselem is interpreted spiritually, a moral likeness, an abstract resemblance.
But the sources you looked at argue differently.
They argue for the root meaning, Tselem as something cut off or cut out, something concrete, physical.
So, not an image, but a sample, like a tissue sample.
Or more specifically, they argue DNA. If the Elohim were physical beings, their likeness transferred to humans had to be physical too. They weren't bestowing a soul. They were literally cutting out a piece of their own biological blueprint and grafting it onto the existing hominid structure.
That's quite a rereading. So the repetition of Slemen in Genesis isn't theological emphasis, it's highlighting the physical act of genetic transfer.
That's the argument. It underscores the material process of the modification.
Which then reframes the creation of the female, Kehawa, or Eve. The text says Adam was put into a deep sleep.
Anesthesia, perhaps.
Yeah.
For a medical procedure.
And the material taken from him, not a rib in the way we picture it.
The word used is tsela, often translated rib, yes. But the sources argue it more broadly means side or flank.
Okay, why is that distinction important? Side versus rib.
Well, think about modern medicine. If you need stem cells, particularly hematopoietic stem cells for genetic work or cloning, where do you often harvest them from?
Bone marrow, sometimes from the hip bone, the iliac crest.
Exactly. From the side of the body, the tsala. A procedure that usually requires anesthesia because it's invasive. So the suggestion is that this wasn't about a symbolic rib, but about taking cellular material, likely stem cells, from Adam's side to create the female counterpart.
A procedure possibly carried out by Ninhursag, who's described in Sumerian texts as a medical expert, a geneticist even.
That's the connection made. And this whole process, this creation event, is linked chronologically to the appearance of what geneticists call mitochondrial Eve, roughly in that 300,000 to 250,000 BCE timeframe.
So Genesis chapter 1 and 2 aren't theology, they're lab notes. A summary of a bioengineering project to solve a labor shortage.
It's a starkly different picture, definitely. A challenging one.
Okay, if the creators were physical, biological beings, what about the messengers, the angels, Malak?
Well, again, the sources push for the literal meaning.
Yeah.
Malak simply means messenger or envoy.
Not necessarily a winged spirit.
The descriptions in the Bible, they argue, consistently portray them as physical individuals, flesh and bone.
How so?
They travel, they get tired, they get dusty feet, they need to wash. They are offered food, sometimes they eat, sometimes they refuse earthly food, maybe suggesting different biology or rations. They perform physical actions, deliver messages in person. They seem like personnel, crew members perhaps.
Material agents carrying out tasks, not ethereal beings.
That's the interpretation.
Yeah.
And this physicality, this concreteness, extends even to the most seemingly spiritual concept, the kivod. The glory of God.
Right, the ultimate manifestation of divine presence, usually pictured as blinding light, pure spirit.
But the Hebrew root of kivod means heavy, weighty, tough, strong.
Heavy. That doesn't sound very spiritual.
Not at all. The argument is that kivod wasn't an abstract aura. It was a thing, a substantial, powerful, likely technological object. Perhaps the main vehicle or craft the Elohim used. Its appearance was overwhelming, hence glory, but its nature was material. Heavy.
And the go-to example for this technological kivod must be Ezekiel's vision, right?
Absolutely. Ezekiel's descriptions are incredibly detailed, almost obsessive. He doesn't sound like someone describing a vague spiritual feeling. He sounds like someone trying desperately to describe complex technology he has no words for.
He talks about a wind of storm, rotating fire, a central gleam like electro, which was an amber gold alloy.
Suggesting powerful energy, propulsion, metallic construction. And he notes these living creatures inside the pilots maybe could move in any direction, forward, sideways, up, down, without turning.
Which sounds like advanced maneuverability, not like anything that flew in the 6th century BCE.
Exactly. And the shape.
Yeah.
A wheel in the middle of a wheel. It's hard not to picture something like, well, a flying saucer or a complex gyroscopic assembly. Plus, he mentions a vault or dome above the pilots' heads, clear like terrible ice or crystal.
A cockpit canopy. Or maybe a helmet.
Could be. The point the sources make is the sheer mechanical detail. It reads more like an encounter report than a mystical trance.
And this isn't isolated, is it? You mentioned Zechariah, too.
Yes, Zechariah provides other, maybe less famous, but equally concrete descriptions. He reports seeing a megala, usually translated scroll, but describes it as a flying object.
He gives dimensions, doesn't he?
Astonishingly specific ones. 30 feet long, 15 feet wide. A flying cylinder of those exact dimensions. And then he sees something else. An apha, which is a type of container or vessel.
What about the apha?
He sees this apha taking off, carrying a woman inside it, lifted by 2 other flying females, and being transported specifically to the land of Shinar.
Shinar, that's
Yeah.
Sumer, Mesopotamia.
Right back to where the Anunnaki story is centered. So, again, it's not allegory, it's presented as a report. Specific objects, measurable sizes, physical transport between known geographical locations. It reinforces that technological, material interpretation.
Okay, so we have physical beings, advanced tech, genetic engineering. But what about immortality? Were these Elohim Anunnaki immortal?
Not in the absolute transcendent sense, no. The sources argue their apparent immortality was really just longevity. Extreme longevity from a human perspective.
Tied to their home planet cycle, Nibiru's 3,600-year orbit.
That's the theory. 1 year for them was 3,600 of ours. So they lived for millennia, but they were still biological beings. They aged, albeit slowly, and they could die.
Is there textual evidence for their mortality?
The key passage cited is from Psalm 82. In a literal reading, the chief Elohim is addressing the others in the council, basically telling them off for mismanaging things on earth. And he says, and this is the crucial line, "You too will certainly die like an atom, like a human, and like one of the head's leaders you will fall."
Wow, so the text itself says the Elohim die, just like humans.
That's the literalist claim. They weren't eternal gods. They were powerful, long-lived rulers, but ultimately mortal, subject to biological limits, political strife, maybe even death and conflict.
Understanding them as mortal political actors, that must completely change how we view the laws they supposedly gave, like the 10 Commandments.
It does. The sources argue strongly that the famous 10 Commandments, the ones focused on universal ethics like murder, theft, honoring parents, that those are a later spiritualized version.
Not the original.
Not the original set of instructions given directly by the Elohim figure associated with Moses. The actual text in Exodus chapter 34 lists 10 specific items called the Devarim ha-Asareh, literally the 10 words or 10 matters that were inscribed on the stone tablets.
And that list is different.
Very different. When you compare the Exodus 34 list to the traditional Decalogue from Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, the focus shifts dramatically.
How so? What's on the Exodus 34 list?
It's much more practical, political almost. It's about maintaining allegiance and distinction. Things like destroy the altars of neighboring peoples, make no treaties with them, don't intermarry with them, observe specific agricultural feasts like unleavened bread.
Okay, that sounds like rules for managing an allied territory or a specific group.
Exactly. And then there's the most famous sort of weird one. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk.
Right. That one always stood out. It doesn't seem like a grand moral principle.
According to this interpretation, it's not meant to be. It's likely a specific dietary rule, maybe hygiene-related, or perhaps a way to distinguish their allied group from surrounding cultures who might have practiced such a ritual. It points to a practical contract, an alliance agreement between the Elohim representative and his chosen human group. It's about governance, loyalty, and maybe public health, not universal spirituality.
So the original commandments were terms of a treaty, not timeless ethics.
That's the argument. And this material basis extends to other concepts too, like barakah, the blessing.
How is blessing reinterpreted?
In the earliest texts, blessings from the Elohim are almost always concrete, material things. Grants of land, access to water, good harvests, fertility for livestock and people, victory over enemies. They're tangible resources and support given as part of the alliance. Limited, conditional goods.
Not spiritual well-being or abstract favor.
Not initially. The shift towards a purely spiritual, transcendent, singular God, the sources argue, likely happened later. Perhaps when the direct physical presence and interaction with the Elohim faded or ceased.
So when the landlords left, the tenants had to reinterpret the lease agreement as something deeper, more permanent.
That's one way to think about it, yeah. When the material connection was broken, the memory and the need for authority had to be transformed into a belief system that didn't rely on physical encounters. A transcendent God is always present, even if the spaceships aren't landing anymore.
Okay, let's try to bring this all together. We've gone through sources arguing the Old Testament isn't primarily theology, but a surprisingly detailed historical account.
A record of encounters with non-spiritual, highly advanced beings.
who came here for resources, used genetic engineering to create a workforce.
Possessed advanced technology like flying vehicles, communicated via physical messengers.
And were mortal political beings who made conditional treaties with certain human groups.
And all of this, the argument goes, was later obscured, spiritualized, and repackaged to form the basis of monotheistic religion after direct contact ended.
It really does turn everything on its head. So the final thoughts from these sources. What are the implications for us now?
Well, it fundamentally reframes ideas about prophecy in the future.
Like the common religious hope for the return of God.
Exactly. If the Elohim were physical visitors from Nibiru, operating on a 3,600-year cycle, then maybe the return of God isn't a spiritual metaphor. Maybe it's just waiting for the next scheduled flyby, the return of the creators on their orbital path.
That's unsettling.
And it casts a strange light on our current anxieties, too. Think about bioethics, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. This drive where man wants to be like God.
What if it's not arrogance?
What if it's simply the creature, L-U-L-U, the blended one, finally starting to figure out the science of its creators? Man, the product of genetic engineering, striving to understand and maybe replicate the knowledge of the engineers.
That puts a completely different spin on human progress and ambition.
It does. And it leads to the really big question these sources leave you with. Maybe the most important question isn't just, were the gods real extraterrestrials? But are they still involved? Are they perhaps already fully immersed in our present history, watching their creation grapple with the very technologies they themselves mastered? Are we still part of their long game?
That is a heavy thought to end on, a truly profound challenge to conventional thinking.
It's definitely knowledge that forces you to reconsider, well, almost everything about our origins and our place in the cosmos.
Indeed. A perspective that certainly warrants reflection. Thank you for guiding us through this challenging material today. As always, we encourage you to continue your own journey, walk your own free path of knowledge. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.